I love it when I get to hear that song again. My name is Brian Ward, and you are listening to another episode of the Arkham Sessions. Joining me, as always, the psychologist to the superheroes, superheroines, and supervillains of Gotham City and beyond, Dr. Andrea Letamendi. Welcome, Drea. How are you?
Good. Brian, how are you?
I feel good being back in the seat. It's been a little while. We did a convention appearance. We did Long Beach Comic-Con last week, and prior to that, my schedule, your schedule, both of our schedules just got all kinds of thrown into chaos, and we couldn't do an episode. So for that, we apologize, but we got to go visit some folks at Long Beach Comic-Con. You got to do a really great panel on the psychology of Daredevil. Talk about that.
Yeah, so I had the great honor to join two actors, two writers, and a moderator who is well-versed, of course, in the Daredevil universe.
Sure.
And the entire panel was about the psychology of Daredevil. And I don't mean just the character Daredevil.
Right.
I mean Netflix's Daredevil show.
Yeah, that's what I loved, is that they focused solely on the show because you had a couple of writers from the show, not from the comics, but from the show. You had a couple of the actors from the show. So they had a unique perspective. I was surprised, I guess. I mean, I shouldn't be at this point in time, but I was surprised at just how knowledgeable these folks were prior to going into the show about Daredevil. I mean, they loved these comics growing up.
Yeah, especially, I mean, not just the writers, but also the actors involved in the panel. The two writers were Ruth and Christos Gage, and the two actors actually, they both have fairly interesting roles, you would say.
Yes.
In the way that they experienced the villain, Wilson Fisk. I don't want to give too much away in case folks haven't seen the series.
If you've not seen the series, you absolutely need to see it. It is on Netflix streaming. Go check that out, and then you've got to hear this panel. But please continue.
Yeah. So the two actors were Peter Shinkota and Tommy Walker, and what I will say about those two characters on the show is that they play on those characters that they play are on the bad side.
Yeah,
right?
Let's just say you would be analyzing them if we were doing a podcast on Daredevil.
Right. And I do have to say, we spent a lot of time on the panel discussing Matt Murdock, who's Daredevil, and the psychology behind his behavior and motivations and what he's gone through. Of course, he's kind of the Marvel version of Batman, right? He's gone through childhood trauma, he's gone through loss, and he has decided, I'm going to rid the city of the evil that took my eyes.
Well, the thing that I found interesting about Daredevil, and it's something I've always thought about, I grew up a Daredevil fan, and I always did what all the other people do. I related him to Batman in some way, shape, or form, because you've got a kid who's orphaned and all of that. But something that I was interested in, and unfortunately I didn't get to ask during the audience Q&A because unfortunately there was no time for an audience Q&A during your panel. But there's a very distinct difference between Matt Murdock and Bruce Wayne. And that is that Matt Murdock was blinded in the process of saving somebody. Mm-hmm. Like, he already had that heroic thing about him. Bruce Wayne was a victim. He was someone who was scared. He was someone who was suddenly left without parents who were his guiding forces, until Alfred was then tasked with the idea of sort of bringing this kid up. And then that kid left Gotham to then become Batman. Matt Murdock was already saving someone from quite possibly, most likely, death when he was then blinded. So he was already, sort of born with that hero mentality that I need to jump in front of this truck to help someone. And then becoming blind certainly would stop someone else, but with his particular condition, he then was able to just build on the foundation that was already there, that was already instilled not just by his father, who was the boxer who was fighting for right, at the end, but then, growing up, he sort of rebelled against those that tried to train him to not have emotion. And you did a great job of covering that. But it's something that I would have asked about was or would have pointed out is just that difference between the two characters.
Yeah, I mean, I think that could be a panel all in and of itself, right?
Sure.
The differences and similarities between those two superheroes, and I think you're right. I mean, obviously we know that there's something already heroic about Matt Murdock. I don't know that I agree that there wasn't anything heroic about Bruce Wayne.
But let's be honest. Like, as a child, I mean, he certainly investigated, caves and stuff like that. But in every incarnation that we've seen, certainly since Frank Miller's run on Batman, you've got a child who falls into a cave and is terrified by bats. And in fact, even if you date back to the original, he specifically says that he's choosing bats because it's something that he's terrified of. And so you've got this character who has chosen this symbol because it has a foundation of fear in himself. And he thinks he can use that fear to strike fear into the hearts of the criminal, cowardly lot. Whereas Daredevil is known as the man without fear. I mean, and that's not to say he doesn't have it, but
right.
But certainly you would think he doesn't because he's blind and he's basically an acrobat in Hell's Kitchen. But I think there's a distinct difference between a guy who was raised basically on the streets by a single boxing father who used to take dives for money and all of that. And then you got a kid who was murdered or who saw his parents who were very loving, very nurturing, shot down in front of him in an alleyway coming back from a movie. Or a opera, whichever incarnation you want to watch, but yeah, I mean, I think there is a distinct difference, and I think that the writers specifically gave Matt something heroic to do, where they didn't necessarily give. I don't think Bill Finger and Bob Kane necessarily gave those same heroic actions to Bruce Wayne, who was basically a passive observer.
Well, I think, and certainly now in the most current modern version of Batman and Bruce Wayne, anything from the video game to the comic book and to films, I think that we could probably agree that superhero is motivated a lot by what you're talking about, emotions like fear and revenge and sorrow and loss and grief. There's I don't like to put labels on those emotions and say, well, those are all negative, but to say that those are different emotions than, say, if Matt Murdock is energized by his ambition, by his heroic nature, by his need to be better than his father or to be better than the city or to improve the city. I think that there are some similarities, but I see that at the individual level of the superhero that you have those differences in emotional motivations. And yeah, I mean, at that point, I completely agree. Batman's better.
I knew you would come back to DC. And I think that's the difference too. Is you grew up a DC kid. I grew up a Marvel kid. Though I read a lot of DC comics. I certainly read Batman growing up. But I did. I grew up a Marvel kid. To me, I was able to always relate to the Marvel characters more. And I think it's because they tried. I always saw growing up that DC characters were always sort of alien or orphaned superheroes. You found more superheroes in DC, whether it was that they came from outer space or were given a power ring from someone from outer space, or they came from some invisible island that most people didn't know about. It's one of those things where it's like, you had to be special to be one of those people, whereas at Marvel, you could save someone and unfortunately get your eyes blinded by toxic waste or whatever,
or
you could be bitten by a radioactive spider, or
Sure.
you could be an astronaut and go to space and get hit by cosmic rays like the Fantastic Four. I always felt like you could relate more. Now, certainly over the last few years, DC has certainly given Marvel a run for its money in that regard, and what can I say? I've always loved Batman, but I think I've always loved Batman because Batman was the Marvel character in the DC universe. Like, he was the normal guy who had the money and the willpower and the desire to go learn these martial arts and the ability to escape out of things and build body armor and stuff like that. He was the normal guy, so. I always appreciated that. The panel is absolutely fantastic, and I know you can hear it online. Drea, where is that available?
Yeah, so if folks want to find the panel, it's currently on comicvine.com.
To make it easy for folks, we'll actually make it available here with this link. So go check underthemaskonline.com or fanboycomics.net. And we will make that link available for you. Just click on that and you will be able to hear Christos and Ruth Gage talking about Daredevil with actors Peter Shinkota, who plays Nobu, and Tommy Walker, who plays Francis, two really great villain characters on Daredevil. And then, of course, you get all of the psychological insight from Dr. Andrea Letamendi. So click on that link and enjoy that. Speaking of, I heard a magic word there in your description a moment ago, Drea, the video games.
Oh my God.
You've recently seen, all the stories, related to Arkham Knight. You've seen all the cutscenes. You've played the game. You've seen the story unfold. Without giving anything away, how great was Arkham Knight?
This is probably my favorite game of there are 4 of them.
Yes.
At this point, I don't really count the third one.
I thought the third one was just fine. People hate it, but it's fine.
Doesn't matter. Either way, this is by far the best, coming from the perspective of psychology and motivation and really getting into the brain of the superhero and experiencing what he may be experiencing following what he did in the other game. So I think it pulls everything together nicely, and there's a lot of action, but there's not so much, like, it's not just of course, like, similar to the other games, it's not just punching and kicking, that there's a lot of problem solving. There's a lot of course, riddles, but there's also relationship stuff happening. There's a lot of psychology happening. And I think one of the most brilliant storylines, like the premise, is top notch. So I recommend it if folks haven't played it yet.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, admittedly, it's been out for a little while now. I know a lot of you have already played it. And luckily, I was able to avoid spoilers until I got the opportunity to play it. And I know that you enjoyed playing it, Drea. And it's one of those that you've got to check it out, especially if you love Batman and Batman stories, not just the action adventure like Drea says, but the stories. And they managed to fit a lot of what you know about Batman into this game. So go check it out. And who knows, one day, maybe, who knows, maybe once we're done doing Batman the Animated Series and the new adventures, maybe we just spend a couple of episodes doing the Arkham games. And because you mentioned that it's the most psychologically driven game, and I think you're probably right, but I always think back to the original game, Arkham Asylum, and I always think about those the backstory of Amadeus Arkham and finding those little headstones and listening to his story. This is the story of Amadeus Arkham. And listening to his entire his entire like really messed up backstory, which was awesome. One day I'm going to sit you down. I'm going to have you tell me all about that. But this episode of the Arkham Sessions, Drea, I'm actually excited about because we're not being introduced to a new character. We're getting the opportunity to dive deeper into a character that we've really known since episode 1. And this is a character that isn't new to Batman the Animated Series. I mean, how much, Drea, did you know about Harvey Bullock coming into Batman the Animated Series?
Well, Batman the Animated Series was my first, exposure to the comic book world. So this version of him is how I learned about Bullock. But later, of course, in understanding this character, I knew that he existed before and that his identity has been pretty well preserved. Like he is an officer or detective in the GCPD who has interesting ethical boundaries.
It's flexibility. It's a sort of moral flexibility. Sure, I understand that.
I think he has sound moral ground. I think it's his professional and ethical standards or compass that's a little bit off kilter. But I think that he, we'll talk about this for sure, but like someone we know, the Cape Crusader, he takes some extra steps and he goes around channels and makes decisions that he needs to in order to get his job done. And I think that he breaks protocol and he breaks the law and potentially has this narcissistic element about him that allows him to do that, to bend law so that he can get his job done.
Sure. Well, the interesting thing about Harvey Bullock is this is a character that's been around a lot longer than most people even realize. I think a lot of people know the Harvey Bullock that you know, that detective who bends the rules but is, for all intents and purposes, a good guy, sort of the devil with a heart of gold, maybe. The guy who's got the tough exterior, but on the inside is someone who's going to fight on the side of Gordon. But when it all comes down to it, Bullock wasn't designed this way originally. In fact, he made his first appearance in mid-1974 in June in Detective Comics 441. And he was created by Archie Goodwin and Howard Chaykin, who is the artist of that particular book. And this is a guy who spent the first part of his existence as legitimately the foil to Gordon. In fact, the good Mayor Hill that we know from Batman the Animated Series was the mayor at the time. Mayor Hamilton Hill had actually charged Harvey Bullock with the task of sabotaging everything that Gordon was doing. So it would be like, hey, look, I need you to be my guy who makes sure Gordon doesn't succeed.
What was that? Because the mayor was corrupt as well?
Indeed.
Okay.
Indeed. And all of this was right up until the mid-'80s when we dealt with a certain series, Crisis on Infinite Earths, which I know you know a little bit about. And after Crisis on Infinite Earths, you suddenly had this character who became more the character we know today, the guy who does fight for good, despite the fact that he bends the rules a lot and maybe takes a little off the top, although not necessarily monetarily. He doesn't take bribes.
Right.
But he's got that kind of reputation as the cop that you don't want to deal with, because you don't know which kind of Harvey Bullock you're going to get at any given time. But I think it's interesting that you've got a guy who started out as a straight up villain that was then turned into the guy we know today. And in fact, you can even go to a particular story where it all happened after he ended up giving Jim Gordon a heart attack, literally gave Jim Gordon a heart attack back in the day. And it was at that time that he decided that he would probably become more of the Bullock you see today. Like maybe the lifestyle I was leading before is not the right lifestyle, and you get to legitimately watch this transition into the current Harvey Bullock, which I think is just awesome. You and I did this early on, Drea, and we've sort of stepped away from it for a little bit, but I think it's time that we come back to that original writer's Bible for Batman the Animated Series. And this is, for those who don't remember, the writer's Bible is important to an animated series because it is the thing that tells writers what to write and how to remain consistent with the characters that have already been created. And dating back to the origin of Batman the Animated Series, Eric Radomski, Bruce Timm, and Paul Dini wrote down exactly how Harvey Bullock should be. And I'm going to read from that writer's Bible now. Harvey Bullock would just as soon shoot Batman as arrest him. A rogue detective who gets results, he employs some of the same scare tactics as the Batman, and then some. Crass, unkempt, and genuinely unpleasant to be around, Bullock has few close friends on the force beyond his loose gang of toadies. He has a mercilessly cruel sense of humor and sees himself as a real guy's guy, a loud sports nut who always has a filthy joke to tell despite all of this. He is not stupid. He is cunning, shrewd, and able to think like a crook. Perhaps because he gets results, there is something intriguing about the guy. You can't take your eyes off of him, maybe out of disbelief. Believing his badge is a legal license to break the rules, he resents Batman as an unauthorized meddler who is muscling in on his territory. Down deep, he's probably irked that nobody screams police brutality at Batman like they do to him. But Bullock's good enough to stay just inside the law where the knee-jerks and superiors can't touch him. Despite Gordon's dislike of Bullock, he is, in the mayor's words, a necessary blunt instrument. The Batman doesn't agree. What do you think about that, Drea? Given the 67 episodes that we're at now, does Harvey fit this description to you?
I think that's pretty consistent throughout. We haven't seen him, of course, in every single episode, but I think that that's a consistent description of him.
Absolutely. I'm particularly interested in this element of just how much he might be like the Batman than maybe even the Batman wants to acknowledge.
I think there has been an explicit comparison and even a rivalry. I think that Bullock is legitimately threatened by Batman because what's really different about them? A badge. And in fact, as you mentioned, Batman can almost get away with more. He has more, he doesn't have a license. He has more license to engage in what you said, police brutality without that law enforcement, oath. So yeah. I think that there's that going on. I mean, obviously there's an element of jealousy that I think Bullock, this description that you brought up reminded me that I have always thought that Bullock, he kind of goes along with, like socially, he kind of goes along with everything. He kind of comes off of as if things don't bother him.
Sure.
They just roll off his back. That he's got a sense of humor and that he's pretty resilient and he's tough and everything. But I think that there's something about him that he realizes he's different, and he realizes that he can't really identify with anybody. And maybe he's upset or angered that the one person he perhaps could identify with is the one that sort of challenges his job. In some cases, literally will interfere with his ability to do his job, but also someone who violates and kind of compromises what the law stands for.
Right.
So I think all of that is really threatening. I think it's that strange mixed emotion about someone that you actually admire someone and you kind of relate to them and maybe almost feel like that could be you, but at the same time you're angered and you're repulsed by them. You think what they do. I mean, I think at some point he's over the course of several episodes has called Batman a freak.
Right.
And,
sure.
And I think that he does that to distinguish himself from Batman and to kind of remind himself that he is the one enforcing law. He's the one who's had the training and the education and he's committed to this. Mm-hmm. So I think that it's an interesting dichotomy.
Absolutely. So let's talk about this episode. This is a Bullet for Bullock, as I said, and it aired in September of 1995. It is actually considered a season 2 episode, and it was written by Michael Reeves and it was directed by Frank Parr. So it actually starts out with Bullock walking home. I mean, he's off duty. He's walking home, and it's at night, and he is nearly hit by a car. And what's interesting is at this moment, Bullock decides to take out his gun and start shooting at the car.
That's self-defense.
It could be something. It could be a drunk driver too. Like we don't necessarily know. But yes, you get the sense that this car was specifically gunning for Bullock, and he fires at the driver. But unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on the perspective, misses the car and it drives away. And at that point, he decides to do something that up to this point only Jim Gordon has done. He goes and lights up the bat signal. And what does he have to say when Batman shows up?
I got a problem.
And you want my help?
I mean, what kind of humble pie does a guy like Harvey Bullock have to eat in order to light up the bat signal, Drea?
Cherry?
Could be cherry humble pie.
I think he's desperate. He's not traditionally, he would not refer to Batman. He would not summon him. He's not interested in what Batman would do. But this calls for desperation. I mean, I know this is the beginning of the way this episode opens, but you get the sense that he isn't able to access his own channels and resources the way that a cop normally would. So he's going for the as we talked about before, this is the rogue version of what he needs to do.
Yeah, and I think it's important that we point out that he uses this opportunity instantly, almost, to really let Batman know exactly what cards are on the table when he says,
Let's get something straight from the get-go. I think you're a freak and a menace, and those are your good points. But the commish says you serve a purpose, so I go along.
I appreciate your honesty.
I mean, really, you got a guy who wants to take Batman down, but over the last 66 episodes, we have seen that he understands that Batman serves a purpose. And a lot of this has to do with just how much Jim Gordon trusts Batman. So you've got a guy who's incredibly loyal to Gordon. And yet he's the kind of guy who will throw it all out there. He straight up slaps Batman in the face with these words, basically, that, look, I don't trust you. I don't like you. I think you should be in Blackgate with everyone else. But Gordon likes you, so I need your help.
Why would anyone say yes to that? Like someone asks for your help and insults you and tells you that, says some pretty demeaning things about you, you would help them?
I think Batman knows exactly who Bullock is. Like, I think he understands, certainly after this amount of time, that you've got a character who, for better or for worse, is on the right side of the law, despite the fact that he may or may not bend a number of rules. In fact, at some point in time, Bullock is talking about the fact that he has made a lot of enemies over the course of his career. He's put a lot of people behind bars, and he admits that he has a reputation as being someone who bends rules. And when Batman specifically asks if he's on the take, Harvey's got a really interesting response. He blows straight up at Batman and says, "I have never taken money from the mob, but
I just bend the rules a little sometimes. You understand? We're not all that different."
We're on the same side, but we're not the same.
Yikes.
So what do you think, Drea? I mean, how different are they? I mean, you've got a guy who became a cop and, yes, bends the rules, but gets results. And then you've also got a guy who never became a cop. Doesn't bend the rules because there are no rules to bend. He just straight up threatens, pummels, hangs villains off of rooftops with his grappling hook, does all kinds of things that are over the edge of what we would say is acceptable for the police to do. How different are they?
I think that something that makes them very similar is that they have this black and white way of thinking about criminality in Gotham City, that I think both of them truly believe that there are bad people and there are good people. Now, over the course of the show, you and I have talked about how, reality just doesn't match that there are bad actions and bad behaviors and certainly evil behaviors when it comes to some of the villains that have malintent and would be willing to murder, for instance. But I think that for these two, something that aligns them is the idea that there are these there's this simple reality for them. Some people are bad and they need to be found, they need to be identified, they need to be prosecuted, they need to be incarcerated, and we are relentless in our efforts to find them. So I think that there's a strong similarity there, but I think that what motivates them is a little bit different. There's something about Bullock that, tells me that he is proving a point about his professional abilities, that he certainly could have experienced some kind of interpersonal or family trauma. I'm not saying that he doesn't have loss and hardship in his life, but it seems like he's not motivated by the need to reconcile that like Batman is, right? I think that he's motivated by this strong insistence that he's good at his job and he needs acceptance and validation that what he's doing is right, which is a very mature adult type of motivation. I mean, I think there's certainly nothing wrong with that. Whereas Batman is and has been over the course of several years, he's stuck. He is stuck in this mission. And I'm not judging that. I'm not saying that's bad or good, but I'm saying that he's motivated by something a little bit deeper and sorrowful and personal when it comes to what he's doing.
Sure.
So I think that those differences could lead to why there's such conflict between them.
And something that you just said strikes me as very honest. It's the fact that the two of them both acknowledge the same black and white, good versus evil, legal versus illegal. But I think there's also the fact that the two of them both see the exact same shade of gray as well, where they both acknowledge that there is a middle ground there that we need to dabble in order to get the results. And I think Bullock does get, for lack of a word, punished for that, where Batman does not. And at this point, really, I would say that that the Writer's Bible has something very on point, which is that I think Bullock maybe has a legitimate argument against Batman for this very reason. Now, the difference is Bullock took an oath. and Batman took an oath to his parents, probably at their gravestone, or something. Like, well, we saw it. We saw it in Mask of the Phantasm,
yep.
where he vowed to do this, but it wasn't a legal oath, taken when he accepted a badge, and that's the difference.
Well, I think that's an important difference, because one oath is a commitment to one's own personal mission, one's own deeply personal, emotional mission about the way that they're going to live their life. Like, it's grounded in his kind of like vision about his identity and his world. Whereas the other oath is about a group of people. It's about the department, the police department. It's about the relationship with the commissioner. It's about the relationship with all of law enforcement and of the good side, right? The programs and services that are supposed to serve this community and ensure safety. And again, I'm not necessarily judging one or the other, but I certainly think that those are differences that are important to note.
I think you're right. Let's move forward. The thing that Bullock has brought Batman there to learn is that he believes someone is after him. He thinks someone is out to kill him. It turns out this driver isn't the first thing that's happened to Bullock over the last couple weeks. In fact, he's had a couple of different near misses where he thinks someone is after him, and he wants Batman's help. He trusts Batman to be able to help him find the would-be killer, and then he goes about his way, and he completes his walk home, and that's where we get to meet his landlord, Nivens. Nivens is an interesting character. He's sort of this Weasley, sniveling. He's the antithesis of Bullock. Where Bullock might be crass and dirty, Nivens is the kind of guy who just can't accept dirt.
There's a doormat outside, Mr. Bullock.
Really? I thought you were the doormat around here, Nivens. Don't crowd me, Dork, or I'll wipe my feet on you.
What just happened?
I know. Well, let's talk about that. I mean, this is that part of Harvey that seems almost to me to be a little bit of a facade.
Yeah, I mean, I think he wants to be that crass kind of mean guy. He wants to be off-putting. I think he enjoys being off-putting. And what does that do? It distances people from him, so he can kind of be alone and isolated. As we see in this episode, he lives alone. Again, not judging that. A lot of us live alone, but I think that we see him push people away. We see him lack compassion. And I think it's interesting that in this episode, he's had his, long day of work, and he goes home and he's by himself. And the one person that might be a connection, a social connection, or a source of social support, he is rude to and insults, and that's, it's really sad to see that.
When you see that sort of thing, I mean, to me, it strikes me as sort of a bullying tactic. As someone who has dealt with bullies and has certainly dealt with children and people who engage in this sort of lifestyle, frequently. What would you say about Bullock and what you know about him? Why does he put on that tough guy exterior like that?
That's what's interesting, is that we don't really know too much about him. We don't know about his family. We don't know about his history. We don't know about his losses and his weaknesses and strengths so much. Like, we could assume, we could kind of create a story about him that he has himself been bullied, or that he's lived in an environment where aggression and harassment and ethical bending, that's what he knows, because that's what he grew up with. But we don't know enough about him to understand what his motive is. I think what we can see with his behavior is that most would agree he is uncomfortable with other people, and before he gets hurt, he wants to hurt other people.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. While Batman is plugging in data into a what looks like a renovated or an upgraded Bat computer, it looks entirely different in this particular model. Bullock and one of your favorite characters, Renee Montoya, are out tracking down some bank robbers. And the robbers are making their escape when Bullock decides to chase one of them onto the rooftop of the building. Well, it's a good thing that Batman decided that he wasn't done for the night, because he then comes in and actually saves Bullock from what would have been really a bullet to the back, because this robber took dead aim and was ready to fire. But Batman comes in and saves the night, as it will. And Bullock seems a little, I don't know, for lack of a better word, ungrateful a little bit. Like, he sort of seems like, what are you doing here? You should have been working on this other thing. I had this, and we all know he didn't. But he tells Batman to go and work, and that he will meet him later, and wants to know how to find Batman, and Batman says that he'll find him, which to me means Batman's just going to kind of stalk Harvey for the rest of the night. I don't know. But he then arrests this bank robber. Now, straight up, I think there's something wrong with his method here.
You got the right to remain silent. If you give up that right, you'll probably bore me to tears, so keep your trap shut, dog Brett.
Well, he read him as Miranda's.
I'm going to tell you right now, he didn't read anything, and that criminal is getting away scot-free simply because...
Wait, those aren't the Mirandas?
Simply because this guy didn't follow any kind of procedure. So, it turns out Bullock needs to be a vigilante because he can't actually stay within the confines of the law and read the proper Miranda rights. But so after his shift, he ends up going home and is surprised, I don't know why, to find Batman right there waiting for him to talk about everything that he's learned. So Batman tells him straight up that he doesn't think that anyone is actually out to kill him. He thinks that someone is out to scare him, essentially, and that and I'm not sure how that really goes over with Bullock all that well, but Bullock tries to move forward and moves on with his life, and then all of a sudden, yet again, he is nearly killed. This time by a train. We've seen a number of people almost killed by trains in Gotham City. Drea, have you noticed this?
I think it's because there are no engineers. There are no conductors.
Oh yeah. It's always like a mechanical.
It's just automatic.
Yeah, that's a problem, and something Wayne should probably look into, since he probably owns the transit system.
I think that was his
Gotham
design.
City. I think we're finding something. This is what it is. Batman needs victims, so he has created an automated transit system that will run people over. Harvey Bullock goes back to work, and he is pretty, I think it's fair to say, shaken a little bit.
Obviously, as a detective, he encounters threats all the time, but they're a different kind of threat. Mm-hmm. His life has been in danger twice now because someone has personally threatened him or personally targeted him, and that to him is unsettling. So I think that's what this shift is.
Right. Well, at this point, Batman thinks he's narrowed it down to someone that Bullock put away a long time ago, Vincent the Shark Starkey. And this is a guy who literally was building up a drug, for lack of a better word, empire. And, Harvey Bullock put him away. Now, Drea, I want you to listen to something that Batman says here, and keep in mind that we're listening to a cartoon. Okay, this is something ostensibly for children, and I want you to listen to it, and I want you to tell me what sticks out to you.
Summer Gleason did an expose on South Gotham crack houses last week.
I don't know that. Well, I feel as though they're making a comment about some evil things that are happening in the city. Drugs would be one of those things. I mean, they're not showing that to you, but they're mentioning it, as one of these stories. So I didn't really bat an eye at that.
But when was the last time that you saw a cartoon for kids specifically bring up something like crack cocaine?
Not since this one.
Is what I'm saying. I mean, like, this is something that the writers were able to do, and they do it not once but twice, because then when Bullock goes to Summer Gleason, he says, you did this story on Cracktown.
What's Cracktown?
The crack houses. Like, he's straight. I mean, like, these writers are treating, I mean, I'm not going to say they're treating, crack nonchalantly, because they're not at all. But I think I found it fascinating as someone who enjoys animation and enjoys, things that were designed to be watched by kids during the weekdays. The fact that Batman just brought up crack as, it's like, Summer Gleason wrote a story on crack houses down in, this could have been like Baltimore. Like, we could have been watching The Wire. I just personally found it interesting that Batman is talking about crack houses, and then Bullock later is calling it Cracktown. But maybe I'm wrong. But something that I found interesting about this conversation is actually he ends up talking to Renee Montoya, and she says something that I found a little sad, because this was around the Christmas / New Year's Hanukkah season. It's a holiday season, and she specifically asks,
"Well, you're sure full of holiday spirit. What are you doing for New Year's?"
Same thing I did for Christmas. My laundry.
Yeah.
I mean, that's sad. This is a guy who's alone. He's by himself.
And the way that he talks about it is that he's sort of, it doesn't bother him. He's nonchalant. It's his life. He's, he'd rather be alone. And I think that most people assume that he's so cranky with other people that he would rather be alone. But, I think Renee is one of the characters that understands him at a deeper level and is compassionate about that and would want to know what he's doing for. And I know she doesn't necessarily invite him over, but.
Well, how do you feel about that? I mean, like, how do you feel about Bullock as a character, knowing that he is spending his holidays doing his laundry? For starters, do you really think Harvey Bullock is doing his laundry?
No, I don't think he does.
And New Year's?
I don't think he does laundry.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great episode because there's a lot of emotional stuff that you can connect to. Even if you don't like Harvey Bullock, there's something about that guy who's a bit oafish and is the kind of guy who's standoffish and maybe doesn't have that many friends on the force.
Well, I think, if you think about this being a kid's show, that while, the overt story here is that you've got a detective who's recruiting Batman to help him out with this mystery, that this is a character that, if you're watching the show, we know is, tends to be the big oaf, tends to be the one who's rude and who's mean and even a little bit of a bully. And we can see that as we get to know him better, the truth is he's very alone. He doesn't have a lot of family around him. He's not supported by a lot of social relationships. He spends holidays alone. The idea that the one person that he talks to, he yells at in front of his building. And I think that this could be a tale about getting to know the bullies. If we were thinking about this being a kid's show, not just seeing the bullies or the kids that engage in bullying behavior as mean-spirited and as having malintent, but just to see them as kind of misunderstood, young boys and girls who kind of reach out in the wrong way, like maybe they're interested in connecting and maybe they're interested in being around others, but the way that they connect is maladaptive and unhealthy. Like, in a way, it's as if they don't actually know that what they're doing is harmful to themselves and to others. So there's this element of like, yeah, we don't like him. We tend to have not liked him throughout the series, but now we can kind of extend some empathy toward him and understand him a little bit better. Yeah,
for the first time ever, we're given an insight into Harvey Bullock that I think is played off as this sort of throwaway line, but at the same time, I think it speaks volumes about that character and tells us a lot about the type of person that we're dealing with. Needless to say, that they're going after the wrong guy. Like, let's make this long story short. Vincent the Shark Starkey is not the criminal they're looking for. They capture him, and he basically says he has no idea what they're talking about. And then as they're going back to Bullock's home, he ends up getting mugged by an armed criminal that sounds very familiar. And when they unmask that criminal, it turns out that it is, in fact, a Scooby-Doo episode. It is his landlord. It is Nivens.
Zoinks!
It is, in fact, Zoinks. It is.
Wait, you can't. You cannot. You have to do it. You can't go any further.
Wait, I'm sorry. Hold on a second. Are you implying that because I'm a redhead, I should be able to say Zoinks?
Zoinks!
No, but it turns out to be the landlord Nivens, and why is Nivens trying to kill his tenant Harvey Bullock?
You insult me, you treat me like dirt. No jury in the world would have convicted me.
Think that's true?
No. So he's delusional,
but he certainly feels like he's in the right. Like, he feels like he's validated. He feels like this guy is dirty and not a good tenant and frankly is abusive and he feels like the jury might see it as a mercy killing of sorts. And what I find interesting is Bullock's reaction to it afterward is that, I could see someone like Vince coming after me. What I didn't see was someone like Nivens coming after me. And that almost seems to really resonate with Bullock a little bit.
I don't think he realizes just how much he's hurt other people. Moments ago, I said that he could have been hurting, that he could have been, bullied himself, but that as he's berating others and putting them down and being demeaning, this is, he's really only thinking about himself and trying to push off negative feelings and trying to push off rejection and push off whatever it is that he's trying to regulate on his, emotionally. So I don't know that he fully was aware that on a daily basis, someone was being hurt by this, that someone was, so pained that he would take it upon himself to cause Bullock to die.
Drea, looking at this entire episode, it's easy to see as sort of a toss-away episode when you're looking at it from the perspective of just someone who wants to watch an animated series with Batman in it. But from the perspective of our show, I feel like it's actually very telling. And I'm curious, I think you and I can both say, although you can certainly say it with more authority, that Bullock isn't someone with any sort of mental disorder or personality disorder or anything like that. We're not going to talk about how you would treat him if you were taken to Arkham Asylum or anything like that. But tell me honestly how you felt about this episode watching it.
I agree with you. I mean, I certainly stand by this idea that while we don't know a lot of Bullock's history, while we're unaware of previous hardships and trauma and interpersonal bullying if that happened to him. From what we see, he definitely struggles with his ability to connect to others. And, we don't need to slap a label on that. We just need to understand that for whatever reason, his way of interacting socially is to hurt others, is to put people down, to berate them, to almost like not just instinctively, but almost proactively. Like before this goes any further, and he did the same thing with Batman. Like before you get the feeling that we can be friends, before you get the feeling that you can trust me or I can trust you, you need to know that I think you're a freak. So let's take away the whole superhero thing. Like think about someone telling someone that I need your help, but you need to know how I really feel about you. There's this really lack of empathy on his part, but it seems to me that there's also this need to be proactive in ensuring that someone doesn't attempt to connect with him.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about this episode is that we are probably getting, for all of the previous episodes where you have legitimately said that they are showing signs of this and this and this, we're probably getting the closest thing that you and I have seen to an everyday personality out there, on the streets. I mean, someone who is in no way labeled with a disorder or whatever. And yet this is something we see. This is something we see every single day. And in fact, it's something we see every day even more now that the internet is a thing. What
do you mean by that?
Well, the fact that, there are a lot more Harvey Bullocks on the internet than there are even on the sidewalk. Right now,
right.
It's so much easier to attack you now proactively than it is to wait for you to do something to me. And I think that this episode, I don't want to say it's prophetic, but I certainly think it's something that people could actually watch now and say, you know what, that internet troll is probably doing their laundry for Christmas and New Year's.
Yeah, I mean that's probably accurate. The reason they lash out, the reason they attack others is that there's this kind of need to connect, but it's not at the same need to connect that we might have. It's completely based on this negative, almost impulsive urge to hate on others. And yeah, I would say I certainly haven't talked to every troll on the internet, but in a lot of ways and in many cases, these are individuals who are in their real life, offline, aren't experiencing enough positive social interactions that they go online to find some connection. And, let's face it, I'm just going to be real here. A lot of times when we just reach out with politeness and calmness and respect and curiosity, a lot of times there's just silence on the other end. Mm-hmm. When you reach out with accusation and negativity and brutality and personal attack, you're going to get a reaction.
So, Drea, this was a good episode. Next week, we get yet another episode where, once again, spoiler alert, Batman is captive. He is captured, this time by every member of the Rogues Gallery, it seems. It's like almost got him, but now they're living it instead of talking about it. So, I know you're looking forward to that. It's called Trial. And I'm looking forward to it. Until then, though, where can folks find you online?
I'm on Twitter at Arkham Asylum Doc. And of course, the website is underthemaskonline.com.
And you can find me. I am at bward028. You can also find us both. We man the Arkham Sessions Twitter account. That is at Arkham Sessions. You can also email us your questions or comments. We are arkhamsessions@gmail.com. And you should definitely go and check out our family over at fanboycomics.net. They are absolutely fantastic. They don't just do podcasts, though they do some fantastic podcasts over there. They also do some great comics over there as well. So go check them out. And then check out their Twitter. They are at Fanboy Comics, their Twitter account. Comics is spelled with an X. It's at Fanboy Comics with an X. Until next week, I am Brian Ward.
I'm Dr. Andrea Letamendi.
And together we are
The Arkham Sessions.